to write my history, and she found that kind of interesting. And then, but she said, I still don't know anything about you. So now I'm writing words and phrases that have meaning to me, and what I see them as meaning. So pet peeves might be another area to explore.
So you're not writing it as a story of your life.
Well, I have that too.
Oh, you have that too.
I'm somewhere into around the year 2000, but
oh, that's pretty far on.
Yeah.
Far on.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about any of you, but I know that I'm sad that I don't have a much better understanding of my previous relatives back into my grandparents and great grandparents and things. I know of them and by name, but very, very little about them.
No, that's unusual. I thought that only occurred with the blacks because of they're having to find out about slavers and not knowing the background once we get to that point. But I thought that you would be able to go all the way back and.
Well, if I took the time to do a lot of research, I could probably do that, and there's more avenues to doing that. I just haven't gotten around to doing that.
well, there's also, in your case, you probably can go back 150 years in large measure because the families stayed together. I can go back, by name at least, about 120 years when they first came to the United States. All the other records, all the other history has been destroyed.
Been destroyed.
And so you do the best you can with what you got. Chuck, I don't know what your background is. I know that my great-grandparents came around 1900, 1905, 1910. And I'm having trouble even figuring out where they came from.
Oh.
Some of the records have 3 or 4 different names of the locality that they came from.
Wow.
And it's all in the same family, and in some cases came on the same ship. So
I mean, this guy, Professor Henry Louis Gates, he does the roots for different people.
Okay.
And he traces their ancestry using DNA and using records and migration records, and goes back all the way wherever he can. And he has traced records for a lot of people, including African Americans through slavery, but also non-Africans. And so, but that needs a lot of research, as you said. It's not that you can just suddenly sit down but he goes through a lot of records.
I mean, you can get
come
into Ancestry, all these different companies now that do a lot of this stuff for the right amount of money.
have anybody done that yet, the Ancestry? I did Ancestry.
Oh, you did Ancestry?
And I found a cousin who I didn't know existed. I vaguely remember, I'm not sure I ever met the grandmother, but I do remember her dress shop.
Wow.
Because we didn't live in Brooklyn. We were we'd come up maybe once or twice a year, and on the way out, my father would occasionally stop at this dress shop where his aunt owned it, and stop in for 30 seconds, and then we'd drive to Tennessee or Pennsylvania or wherever. It turns out her granddaughter I just met about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I did the another DNA analysis kit, 23andMe.
Yeah.
And they claim that I have cousins, but I have not looked into that yet. So I don't know. So I will. After I talked to you on the telephone, then I thought, well, maybe I should really seriously look into it, because I got a few emails says you have cousins. I said, okay.
Maybe they're rich cousins.
Yeah, well, that's different. If they are rich cousins, they're not going to give me money.
How do you know that?
Have you tried to see whether you're related to Bloomberg?
No, I have not looked into that part yet. But I just talked to Bob, and that's when it occurred to me, maybe I should look into it. But maybe Bloomberg isn't there. I don't know.
I have no idea.
I'd love to find
He's
out.
not on the list of the people they sent me.
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately, there's several different things that can happen. Number one, I have a first cousin that I hadn't seen in 20 years, and he showed up on my list, which meant he had done Ancestry.
Oh, okay, yes.
I don't know when. And so I sent an email saying, hey, what's happening? I haven't seen you in a long
Did
time.
they give you
He
the
never
email
responded.
address?
Well, no, they have their own messenger thing.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So,
I have to look into this.
Yeah, so very often you don't have any way to bug the people if they don't want to be found, or they don't want to be found by you, as the case may be. So I don't know what happened to the first cousin. I mean, he may have done it many years ago and died already.
Could be.
There's no way to tell. But I did find the one.
It's I had a strange experience. On an airplane, on 2 different airplanes, I met a second cousin I didn't know.
No.
Didn't know.
He was on the second plane, or he was on the first plane?
No. Sitting on the same same aisle I was sitting on. 1-2 seats away. And we struck up a conversation, and all of a sudden, wait a minute, we have a common grandfather.
Wow.
Oh. And that's interesting that you were able to be comfortable enough to have that discussion, because more people now are afraid of spam and afraid of people taking advantage of, and so they don't like giving out information and history to see. Now, I think having the DNA done is pretty good, and one should even try that.
Yeah. In one case, there was a woman. She had the same last name as I did,
Wow.
and I said, "Oh, you must be my cousin." And as it turns out, after a long conversation, we finally concluded that we knew, her family knew my family, and as it turns out, her father was the best man at my father's wedding because they were first cousins.
Oh, okay.
Wow. So they were really, really close that way.
Oh yeah, and another one. I was talking to a fellow who he and his wife were. They were retired, and I was on a business trip going to Florida, and we had conversations about going to. Have you ever traveled in Italy? And I said I traveled in Ireland, and I said that my people come from a very small town in Donegal, Ireland, and he said, "Oh, my wife's people come from Donegal," and then I told him my grandfather's name, and she then, she'd been looking out the window the whole time, not in the conversation. She turned around with an ashen face and said, "My father's name was Hugh McCarran." Now, clearly, it's not the same fellow, but her grandfather was John. He named his first son after his brother Hugh.
Wow.
And we were second cousins. It's just unbelievable.
Sitting
random.
next to each other.
And there are a lot of McCarrans around in Woburn, and I wonder if they're related to me.
You could have a McCarran get together and then discover.
Yeah.
Well, actually, what started this for me was my son-in-law. His father had just died and had been talking about having a reunion for the Italian side of his family, and never got around to it.
I see.
So my son-in-law organized the thing, and he got 120 people in his backyard. So it started.
Wow.
What's his name? What is his name?
Peterson. No, you're thinking of not the Danish one.
Not the Danish one.
No, I don't know the Italian side.
I'm kidding.
Name,
I'm kidding.
but they're nice people. I've met a number of them since that happened. Nice family to be associated with.
Now I have a distant cousin that I still have not yet met, who did my grandmother's maiden name was LaRoche, and she's a LaRoche, and she, I don't know how many hours or days or months she must have put in doing this research, but she got the whole LaRoche family all the way back into at least into the 1600s.
Wow.
And I mean all the grandchildren and grandparents and so forth. And I found out a few years ago when I got the copy, she published an actual good-sized book.
Wow.
On all the connections, and one of my good high school friends, turns out we're cousins. We share a connection with the LaRoche family.
Oh, that's
And
wonderful.
so it was just funny to see that. But I did Ancestry, and I've always thought I was French. And actually, the Ancestry came back saying I'm more Irish than I'm French. But so I'm not sure I fully accept that.
Oh, but you still write LaRoche, R-O-C-H-E?
I don't write it at all 'cause that's not part of my name.
That's not part of your
That
name?
was my grandmother's
I see,
maiden
okay.
name. But so I'm curious. I'm going to send away one of these other
Yes.
search services and see if they come back with the same thing. They did they broke it down. I forget what the actual percentages are, but I'm 1% Jewish also, which isn't that uncommon, I guess, because there's a lot of connections that people
Yes.
have. But it was kind of an interesting thing.
I'll give you a story. This cousin who I just met about 3 weeks ago, a few years back, she had a best friend from high school, and they were inseparable. And the woman came down with some form of cancer, and they needed transplant material. So, being best friend, the woman signed up, and turned out she was a good match.
Wow.
So they did the transplant, everything was cool. And then they started saying, why is it that you're such a close match? They started doing a little research. They're second cousins.
Oh,
Wow.
And they'd known each
Wonder-
other forever.
Wow. That's a miracle.
It worked out well,
Yeah.
certainly. But there's a lot of that going around.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
Well, also as you pointed out, the people have moved around, and also people have been breeding with each other over the ages. So that's why there is mixture of all these genes all over the place, and you find them.
yeah.
And now you can trace them, so that's good.
Yeah.
But you need to be careful. My wife and my brother both did, one did Ancestry, one did 23andMe. My wife and her brother, and they came out relatively different.
Of course. But what has happened over the years now, actually, the different companies have different databases, and depends on how many individuals they have got hold of, and they have created their own database. And based on that database, they reflect the ancestry. So that's why it can become kind of bizarre sometimes.
Right.
And so you have to kind of worry about that. And as the database becomes larger, I think it's going to become better. But at the same time, when people say, well, my ancestry is 20% Botswana, 30% Hmong, but then when you assume that they have been static, they have not moved anywhere, and so that's why my ancestry is like that. But that's also an assumption we make in populations. But that's what we got the best about that.
Well, I know in my case, according to Ancestry, I'm 100% Ashkenazi Jew, and that's all they told me initially. But then they did I guess they've broken it down a little bit further, and what I already knew, my 4 grandparents come from totally different parts of Eastern Europe.
Wow.
So, I mean, many, many thousands of miles. So that as they learn more, I think that's what you were trying to say.
Yes.
They can break it down.
They can break it down.
A great deal better.
Does that mean, do you have Khazar ancestry as well, or no?
Not clear. One of the grandparents came from the Kiev area, or
Okay.
that's the family story.
Okay.
Another one came from Odessa, which may have some Khazar in it. The others are probably not. I know your friend, we were
Yeah.
having that conversation.
Yes.
I really don't know because the Ashkenazi Jew is such a generic
Yes, it is.
thing.
It
It's
is
hard
a
to
generic
tell.
thing. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
we talk about the Ashkenazi,
Right.
but then you got to really make sure you break it up into
Right.
different cohorts to understand it better. And that's why actually people talk about Ashkenazi Jewish diseases in Ashkenazi Jewish populations. Then you find similar diseases in French Canadians. And how does that happen? But we don't know.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah,
So that was that's an interesting relations. But
right.
how does that happen? I don't know.
Well, it's important to think about trying to get your history. As I have said before here, that I was one of the founders of the New England chapter of the African American Genealogical Society, and we still meet at the library in Lexington.
Wow.
Okay.
And it's a whole grouping of people who meet because it's interesting. My great grandmother only had a couple percentage of black in her, and this was in the state of Mississippi, where the South, where my family came from. So it's related to slavery. However, I don't know how this person ended up with so little black in her, but yet was considered black when she could have gone out in the street and be white. But I think it's important that particularly for the blacks, to try to get the history, because my grandkids, they like to know, you know, when I go to Christmas next week, they'll be asking, Grandma, did you find out any more history? And I feel badly because I haven't looked lately. And so I got to start working on that again.
I was just, what you said triggered a thought. The musical Showboat had a character there, the singer. She had a very small percentage, very small percentage of black, and she was, for the most part, looked Caucasian. But the rule in the South at that time was 1% black, you're black.
Yes, I see, and probably still that way in the South.
Yeah, and they made laws like that. It wasn't just thinking. They made laws about it.
Nuremberg defined Semitic as being, I think, his great-grandfather, but in practice it was any association. So it's not just, I don't know what it would be in South Africa with apartheid, but it's very similar, whatever, and that's probably how your great-great-grandmother ended up being black, because somewhere along the line there was a union, and she grew up on the plantation as a slave, and that's what it was.
Yes. So let me just say to you, if you know any McCullers,
McCullough.
McCuller,
Okay.
McCullers, or Dones, Dones, or Smith, or
I know a couple.
Oh, Smith.
One or two.
yes, let me know. Don Smith. Yeah, there's one other, but I can't think of it right.
Smith's one of the most common names in the country.
Yeah.
There is a related to what you just said. There is a long time ago there was a documentary on WASP convention, and they were discussing. It's kind of interesting when you listen to them. It was you had to be a certain. I mean, you had to be a certain color, certain parentage to be considered WASP. And if you were not, you would be just not paid attention to. So there were people in that gathering where they had married outside that quote unquote WASP. So they felt kind of outsiders. And it was interesting when you have these people, they were expressing their pride to be WASPs and how they could exclude everybody else. And I thought that was fascinating that given that they were already white people and they were quickly making themselves as a separate category within the white community, as a particular sect, as a kind of thing. So I have no idea how you become one, but that's the way it is.
Dr. Seuss had an interesting book called The Sneetches. My wife's favorite book. Basically, there were two kinds of Sneetches, those with belly buttons and those without. And the ones who had belly buttons figured that they were superior to the ones without.
Of course, yeah.
And then some guy invented a machine that gave people belly buttons. So all the people without belly buttons got belly buttons. Also, the people with the belly buttons originally said, "Oh, we can't have that." So the guy invented a machine that took away the belly buttons. And he had it.
Another racket going.
It was a great deal.
Wow.
According to Dr. Seuss, eventually people got confused and stopped worrying about belly buttons. But in reality, we'll always find something.
I mean, that's going back to the biblical time. That's how one of the characteristics was to do the circumcision. So you had circumcision, so that you had the Jewish community, and rest of the people were out.
Well,
That's
circumcision was designed,
Yes.
along with most of the other laws in the Bible, to make people separate.
Yes.
To good, bad, or indifferent, that was its function.
But then it became. This is what I was getting to. Then it became kind of common practice that for some time that it was important to do the circumcision. But now the things have changed.
No, in Europe it was not common
No,
practice.
in here. In
The United States,
Yes.
later on.
And
yeah.
it became kind of common practice. So now people are not late. After a while, people began to question that, and so it kind of relates to your snitches story. So how it can go back and forth. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. So you're French and Irish, you said?
Well,
In the
that's what
background?
this ancestry
Right.
said, that I was more Irish than I was French. So I gotta explore that a little bit more.
So
I remember receiving many years ago, when I was much younger, an invitation to join a reunion up in Canada, up in the Montreal area of the Beauregards.
Oh.
And I didn't do that. I was suspicious whether or not it was just and in some ways I wish that I had done that, but I didn't. But I have I came to this area from Gardner, Mass, which is about 60 miles west of here, and there's a lot of our name in that town. Most of us are connected, and so it's. But I don't know to what extent some other aspects of it.
But are they? Have they come from Canada?
Yeah.
The Beauregards?
Yeah. So in the Montreal areas primarily. So one of these days, I don't know. Can't wait too much longer to find out.
Well, as long as you feel French, eat French, you're French.
That's right.
Do you speak French too?
No.
No. Okay.
No. We.
Okay.
Are you familiar with French Canadian or Canadian history? because I have a question I am dying
Yeah,
to find out, and I can't find anybody to ask. In the 1770s, there was a big revolution against British rule, and the 13 lower colonies uh, fought the British, won, created a country of their own. Why did Canada, particularly Quebec, not join that revolution?
I mean, Benedict Arnold went up there, up to Canada
Yeah.
during the Revolution, and tried to take over parts of Canada, and he got defeated up there. And I forget who other historians, what historical people were also involved in this expedition that they went to parts of Canada, and I'm not exactly sure where, whether it was in the Quebec City area or whether it was somewhere, I don't know. I haven't really read a lot about it. So,
What makes you think that that area, Quebec, would have joined the U.S.? I mean, they were French speaking.
Right, but there had been relatively recently, they had been taken over by Great Britain, and there had to be antagonism, probably greater antagonism than there was down in the lower colonies. But for reasons, again, I can't find any history. I can't find anything to explain to me why either they weren't invited or why they didn't take advantage of the fact that the English army was otherwise occupied to start their own revolution.
Is that when the Acadians came down to Louisiana and all that? Or
I'm not sure.
No, I
No?
don't think so. No. I don't know about that.
Because I'm just wondering how is that connected to your history point there? You probably would
Something
know.
happened that caused the Acadians to come down because it was a French
Yeah.
area, but I can't tell you when or what the reason was. I actually remember reading something not too long ago about what the reason was, but I've forgotten.
Did they go down to Louisiana, or did they come just to New England?
they were a good portion of them were driven out of Canada.
They were driven out of Canada, actually. That's what I
okay.
remember.
Yeah,
But
I
I
can't remember
actually
the
also
details.
forgot what the reason was.
Yeah.
So I thought that maybe you remember that, though. Okay.
It's not a history that I've read.
I'm sure that history is out there in some books or some place
Yeah.
if you wanted it bad enough.
It would be so much easier if you knew. I wouldn't have to go look.
But it might not be real accurate.
Well, I'm sure I can object to almost anything. So
We can make up some story.
Yeah, you can make it up, right? And then
I hate it when you do that.
does Beauregard mean something? Or?
It's supposed to be good looking.
Wow,
Yeah.
good looking. Okay.
okay.
No comment.
No comment.
It says exactly that, isn't it? You know, Beau is beautiful and regardez is look.
Is that right?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh wow, you broke it up like that. Wow.
There's an advantage to actually knowing another language.
I wouldn't say that I know French. I studied it for 3 years and I can really remember very, very little.
Wow, at least but you could
Same thing with Latin.
but you could at least parse this piece, Beauregard. Parse, that's good. That's something. Wow.
All right, now that we know something about it, each of us, how does something like that apply in real life? You're trying to go back hundreds of years to learn about your heritage. I, because of just physical limitations, can go back about 120. But it really doesn't matter who my eighth cousins are, probably. What really matters is what does this knowledge do to affect my current life? I met this cousin which is very nice. There's some vague connections through my brother's wife, not professional, not at least as far as I know, nothing more than professional. But it doesn't really affect anything unless we have a family reunion. Other than exchanging emails periodically, it's unlikely that they will have any meaning.
Actually, that's an interesting point you raised. That what essentially what good is it, or what bad is it, that you don't have whole swath of people behind you right here in Burlington or close by. And that used to happen. I mean, even now it happens. If you go to France, for example, or you go to Italy, there are people who are your cousins and they live in the same area. Or you go to India, the same thing happens. But once mobility has come up, people have moved around.
Yes.
And so for example, my first cousins or second cousins, I don't know where they are actually, because they are all over the place. And it's very difficult to even communicate, because some of them you can communicate with and some of them don't want to communicate, and they are physically located at different places. And so to me, for example, it is whatever I am doing whatever I can do here, and whatever they do in their place, they can do in their place. But again, the only thing I can relate to is that there is kind of some common ancestry. That's all. And what good is it? Other than that, I don't know.
So if my family, for example, is looking for family history, they would be surprised if they found someone here in Massachusetts, because the family history that they would know would be Missouri, Mississippi, Tennessee, Arkansas, Illinois, all the states back that way. And if they found relatives, because I am the only grouping that ended up in Massachusetts, and since I ended up in Massachusetts, there's the grandkids now and so forth. And so there's a grouping here, but most of the family grouping would go back to the other states, right? Other states.
But that can change. This cousin who I didn't know about is in Connecticut now. She lived most of her life in New York City or Long Island, but she's in Connecticut. One of my mother's first cousins lived for many, many years in Maine. His sister, actually I don't remember where she's living right now, in New York I think. Her kids, one of them's in New Jersey, not too far from my godson, I mean next town, and another one is up in Maine. My mother's uncle used to live in Chicago and then moved to Florida, very close to where my brother's living.
Okay,
People wonder. I mean, my father was one of the first from that generation to leave Brooklyn, and he never went back. But now many of them have done that. And you run across people, and it's interesting. But in terms of, does it help your life to know this, other than it's just interesting?
Well, going back to what was said earlier, I mean, it certainly can help the life. It turns out that you have a genetic connection with somebody, and there's some health issues. And
my cousin, that's a perfect example.
So that's probably one of the biggest benefits.
Right.
That is the biggest benefit, actually. So you can quickly screen people and find a match.
Okay.
Other than that,
Well,
have a reunion, family reunion.
I'm looking into it.
That would be good to have all people from all over the.
The problem is you have to have some vague idea who these people are to even contact.
Well, that's a difficult
Maybe you
issue.
don't. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just, get one of these ancestry lists and send
Send-
out a
I
generic
did that,
invitation?
and I got a response from one person.
Oh,
How about that?
Well,
So-
I'm not sure there's a certain amount of skepticism
Yes.
whether that person really is this person trying to pull my leg.
Yes,
You know,
yes,
you know,
yes.
maybe they
lack of-
already
lack of
knew you.
trust.
That's true. That one's one I hadn't thought about, but it sounds very accurate.
I mean that is it is a possibility that scammers can
Right.
come up and
Yes.
extract money and all that. I mean, you never know.
Right.
So that's a problem, particularly in modern world. I've not only modern; it used to happen a long time ago also, but now there are more scams which you
Probably
read
easier,
about,
yeah.
and they are easier.
So what do? Do we climb in a hole?
No.
No.
I mean, you go about the way people have gone about after they left the cave. It's the same thing. I mean, a long time ago when people used to live in caves, they had confined environments, but they still had enemies next cave, or they had friends next cave, and then they came out and made more friends and more enemies, and then we started invading each other in different places. And you had the Vikings come all over the place, you had the Visigoths go all over the places, and then you also had some other folks from Spain come to United States and loot and plunder and take the gold away. That's a fascinating part of what humans do.
Well, you know,
It's not
I
just
feel-
humans, the ants. Just look at the ant community.
Yeah, that's what this Professor
Ants.
Wilson will say. Even ants do that. So that's
Yes.
true.
You know,
Even monkeys do that.
I feel really badly right now with what's going on in the world, and that is related to the immigrants who are coming and going to different places. They are leaving their heritage around, and future generations will not know where their heritage began.
Well, stories, just around the dinner table. Seriously, I mean,
Yeah.
you talk about Elizabeth Warren. The last election, she had this guy from India,
Yeah.
Shiva. That was his name, right?
Oh, you mean the who was opposing her?
Right.
Yeah, Shiva.
And he made his whole thing that she was a fake Indian.
Oh,
Turns
okay.
out that she,
Yes,
had
she's
some
Indian.
Indian blood in her. But the key was she had been sitting with her parents and hearing family history, and she grew up with that.
Yes.
In my own personal autobiography, I make reference to that by saying I was born on such and such a date. I don't really remember, but it was talked about around the family table for a long time.
That's it.
It was
That's how-
intended as
yeah.
a joke, but it's very real.
It is real.
That's where the history comes from, and unless you write it down, that's when they stop talking about that, then it's gone.
I mean, the amount of what I understand,
Yeah.
the amount of Indian blood that Elizabeth Warren had is so small.
Yes.
It's almost like almost any of us could have
Right.
that same amount of Indian blood.
But
I mean,
it-
I remember,
yeah.
I remember my father
Right.
when I was young indicating some connection that our family had with Indians way back. But I never said anything about that because I wasn't sure where he got that from or how accurate that was, and so I'm not going to go around and say that kind of stuff.
But at the same time, she said that she was cut off from her father's family, or was it mother's? I think it was father's family, because the mother was an Indian. So it was very real. Tiny percentage. Same way you were talking about a grandmother who was mostly white. The contagion, if you will. The moment it happened, then you were that bad thing, and nobody would have anything to do with you. So from her point of view, it was very real, even though there was very little residual.
Yeah, it really kind of depends on how long her family history had been in Oklahoma. I think it was Oklahoma, right?
Yeah, she's from Oklahoma.
You know, if it was multiple generations, then there's you can see it. Like for instance, you, uh, you probably have no chance of having any Indian blood in you.
Right.
I have no chance of having any Indian blood in me because you know, my people come from Europe, and
In the relatively
Yeah.
recent past.
yeah.
Say, I agree.
Whereas you know, I don't know
I
how.
mean, it depends how far back in Europe they came. I mean, how many years ago did they come from Europe here?
Just 2 generations.
Oh, okay.
You know,
So I have everything in me. Indian, white,
Very
black,
likely.
African,
Yeah.
just everything.
Right.
But what ends up happening is the cultural heritage rather than blood heritage. That is passed along as a culture. So
Right.
once you grow up in a culture and you, I mean, for example, I grew up in Kashmir and I consider myself I'm from Kashmir. I don't know. My parents told me that, and the same story. But what was interesting in that is that long time ago there was a theory in Kashmir that we are all Jews, and that was propagated, and it was one of the things people used to talk about. And I don't know whether it's right or not, but in India, in northeast India, there are people who look Chinese, and they claim to be Israelites because they had been following cultural traditions that look Jewish, that seem to be Jewish, and apparently Israeli head, I don't know who the person is, rabbi or somebody, declares Bnei Israel, and they were actually accepted to
Oh,
be
that's interesting.
descendants of lost tribes or something, and they were brought back to Israel.
Well,
Although they look Chinese.
well,
there's
maybe
a
they're
tribe
descendants
in,
of Noah.
in
I have no
Ethiopia.
idea, but-
No, but there's a tribe in Ethiopia that in the 1950s, I think,
Yeah, they
emigrated back.
they are black Jews. Yes.
Right. So, yeah, I suppose it's possible. And from a practical point of view, I was wondering what's the practical implication. Even though I am relatively light, blonde hair, blue
Yes.
eyes, I have enough of a blood background and cultural background. If things got bad, I could go to Israel and be slaughtered there.
That's really a comical thing there. But that's what it is actually. Culturally, you feel Jewish, and same thing. Those people in Northeast India, they felt Jewish, but they were told stories. Although they didn't, they were not blonde, they were not blue-eyed, they were not brown either, but they were not dark either. They are kind of
Well, if you look at
Chinese
European
color?
Jews, they're darker than the
Yes.
populations around them. I would be the exception because obviously I'm not particularly dark, at least for a European.
I mean, because populations have moved around,
Right.
they have interbred, and Jewish and non-Jewish notwithstanding, and of course that has kind of mixed the colors together. So you see all these different colors, people.
Right.
So what can you do?
And as my wife points out truthfully, the mixtures tend to be the most attractive.
That's what it is.
Yeah. They just,
With all this mixture, and that's what I think about. This world and this country has so much mixture that we should all try to like and care for each other, whether we are seen as Jewish, black, Irish. We all have that little piece of something in us that is of another group. And so we really need to think about and think and care about each other and not really come across like the environment is coming across lately, all these different problems.
Well, as I said last time we met, and I was sure when I said it that I was correct, and then when I went home, I searched to be sure. That's the fact that the U.S. is the third largest country in the world, and Indonesia is number 4. But my point is saying is that, going back to what you just said, is that we're talking about China being number 1, and then India being number 2. And
Population-wise.
I'm sorry?
Population-wise.
Population-wise. And I would suspect that in those 2 countries, the vast majority of those people are either in China are Chinese, in India they are Indian. In the U.S., we've got such a mixture,
Yes.
and we have a mixture of so many different nationalities and people from throughout the world, as no other country in the world has. Because if you go to Indonesia, I'm sure most of the people, the majority of people there are Indonesians. And so we're kind of this hodgepodge of all these different nationalities coming together. It's very difficult.
Yes.
Even
some people
in
just
China, though,
On the
there
other
are
hand,
so many
we're-
racial strains that are different and identifiable, or at least people see themselves as different.
yeah. What I was going to say is, I thought we were all Americans,
Yes.
and you know, I
That's
think
what we're supposed to be.
yes, I think that's you know, even the
Yeah.
immigrants that come over, they are now
They are Americans.
they're
They-
Americans.
Not they, we
Well,
are
They
Americans.
want to be American.
Well, they want to be, and eventually they become.
They become.
So
When they're allowed. Remember, the Chinese were forcibly sent back after they built the railroad.
I understand that. I'm talking about the people here in the United States right now. We're not. I shouldn't have said Americans, because that, you know, that includes Canada and South America. You know, but we're people of the United States, and we should think that way. We're people of the United
Yes.
States. We're not Italian Americans. We're not Irish Americans. We're not Jewish Americans. We're not German Americans. We're Americans, and that's the way we're supposed to think. And that's the problem right now, because so many of the quote people who are in America, they're all the groups are trying to get above the group next to them, and push down the other group that's just below them, and because they want to feel superior to somebody, and that's just wrong.
Yes.
So
That-
what you're saying is this hyphenation piece should be gotten rid of.
Yes.
I agree with you. I agree with you, because although we might be Indian, Chinese, Italian, Irish, but this hyphenation of American should be gotten rid of.
We're primarily human beings.
Yeah, of
and,
course we are.
and that should
Well,
be the,
are
and
we?
that should be the
Okay.
unifying.
See, I disagree strongly with what you're saying. The thing that makes you valuable and you valuable and you valuable, and you not so much, is what's different about you.
No, he's not saying that.
No, but he is implying if we're all the same, if we all have the belly button.
No, he's not
No,
saying. No,
no,
he's
no,
not. He's not
no.
saying that at all.
Oh.
He's just saying that we should be labeled as Americans, but we are Italians, we are
Right.
Irish, we are. But get rid of the
But
hyphenation.
we shouldn't be saying because we have that heritage back there that we're better than somebody else, and I think that's the problem right
The
now.
better part, I agree with you, but the difference is what's important. Because otherwise,
That's
I
what
don't need you.
that's what
You're,
America's
you're
all.
like anybody else. I can go grab somebody from down the hall, put them in a seat, nothing's changed. Your value is you are different.
You're unique.
You're unique. You have different background. You have different whatever.
Well, that is true. Actually, even Paul doesn't negate that.
No, no.
and part of the
you-
difference is you're Italian or Irish or African American or Kashmiri or European Jew, whatever. That, if you start celebrating the difference
But I think what Paul's saying is that you're talking about being an American first.
Being
Right.
American, that's his.
Well, but not even America. I don't care whether you're even physically in America. You have something to contribute. Whether you do or not is a different question, but you have something you could.
Are you saying that
Yeah.
everybody in England has nothing to contribute other than the fact that they happen to live in this one place?
No.
No. You're missing my point, and I'm
Okay.
missing your point.
All right.
My point is we should celebrate everybody in the United States as being co-equal. Now, they may have different ideas, but that's beside the point. What I don't agree with is groups in America push down one other group so that they can elevate themselves over another one. And
we're in
that
agreement
really
there.
basically
Yeah.
comes from the top. The top 1% pushes everybody else down, and as long as they stay up the top 1%, they don't give a darn about what the other 99%
Who are
are
the
doing.
1%?
I'm talking about the people with wealth.
I see. Okay.
Well, I think that's a generality that I would disagree with. I mean, we don't have enough time to talk about that. I mean, there's a lot of truth to what you said, but I would say there's many, many exceptions to that.
Right.
There are a few exceptions, yes, but in general, I think the people, especially the people that are running the country, from a complete part is that top 1%, and that's controlled by the bankers. And you can see it right now. The federal banks are pushing. They're taking a piece of paper, and because they can do it, they're just writing a check and giving it to banks. They don't have any money behind it. But they, in the past couple of months, they've created, what, $5 trillion out of nothing.
Oh, you are talking about the federal money. What is it?
I'm
Injection.
Quantitative easing.
Quantitative easing. Yes. Okay.
And that's what's keeping the stock market high. It's not high because people have money and they're borrowing money and investing it in the stock market, and the interest rate is virtually zero. As a matter of fact, the interest rate from a short-term loan is greater than a 30-year loan.
The quantitative easing isn't something brand new. It's been done
Right.
numbers of times in the past.
It's been done in the past to get out of a recession. The government says we're in a boom area. You don't do quantitative easing when you're having a boom. What's basically happening is we are in a recession right now, and quantitative easing is trying to get the illusion that we're in a boom.
Who are they giving the money to? When they print the money, who gets the money?
The Fed gives money to the banks. Okay? The banks then loan that money out.
I see.
They keep 10%.
Okay.
And they can loan out 90%.
So somebody makes money.
And those people then put their money in a bank. So that bank can then, let's say they give $100. $100, then they can loan out $90 and keep $10. The bank that gets the $90 can loan out $81 and keep $9. So basically, the multiplier is the percent they have to maintain. You take that $100, it just creates. Eventually, it's $1,000. $1,000 of money that didn't exist before the Fed gave the $100.
By the way, that is the basis of banking in the modern area, well before there was a Federal Reserve. Banks The difference was that before the Federal Reserve, banks didn't have to keep any money. They just had to hope that somebody didn't come in and ask for the cash.
Right, like that with that Christmas movie or whatever.
Well, 32. Whenever the Fed was established, 1914, I think.
I don't
I
know.
don't remember. I used to know that.
No, it was in the 30s. It was established, but it was the concept was made in about 1914, and they finally got it. And this was the Rockefellers, the guy from
J.P. Morgan,
J.P. Morgan, the guy from France. What the hell was his name?
Rothschild.
Rothschild.
Yeah, they actually you're
And-
that part history is right, but I don't remember the date.
So the banks are doing this in concert with the government.
Now, what I'm trying to understand now, as we are getting ready to trying to get a president next year, what I can't understand is this wealthiest person, I guess, in the country or in the world, I don't know, who is running for president. I'm trying to understand, why does that person want to be president?
By the way,
You mean
he's not the
Bloomberg?
wealthiest person.
Bloomberg?
Bloomberg.
Yes.
He's rich.
He's
A
rich.
hell of a lot richer than I would ever hope to be, but he's not the
He's
wealthiest
not
person.
the wealthiest.
Oh no, no.
Somehow or another, I
but-
thought
but
he
We
was
don't even know who the
wealthiest.
wealthiest people are.
But at the same time, you have to recognize that it is the people with a certain amount of money that run the world, not people who have nothing. So whether he's the wealthiest or not, but that is the group
Well, it
who
stands
actually
out,
run the world.
and I'm saying, oh my goodness, he's paying his money
Yeah,
to
he doesn't have
be on
to.
television, and he's on television all the time.
Because he's not a retail politician. So going out and shaking hands is not his thing. But if he can get his ideas out, and by the way, he spent his money long before he decided he was going to run for president to support the causes he believed in. So he's not Johnny come lately who's just saying, hey, you know what, I think I'll run for president.
Yeah, he grew up in
Medford actually.
Yeah.
with-
Oh, I thought he grew up in New York. I didn't realize he was
No.
from Boston.
He's from Medford.
He's from
Oh.
Medford, and he was basically a humble family. He just went to New York and
Raise some money,
Made it big.
get rich.
investing properly, just like Steyer, except he did it much better.
Yeah. Well, I do
And-
know that he started, unlike somebody we know, he started basically as a middle-class guy.
No.
Going back to what you just saying though, as far as Bloomberg and Steyer, do you begrudge them that they made all this money, however they did?
No,
So you were saying you were being critical
No,
earlier.
I was being critical.
No, you were being critical earlier of the rich people. Aren't they examples of the rich that are?
they certainly are in the 1%. Actually, they're in the they're in the 10th of 1%. But there's that group in general that is the top 1%. They want to stay that way, and the only way they can stay that way is to get more and more and more. And
And
like,
run the country.
well, run the world.
I mean, that's human nature. Actually, I would. That's
Right.
what my theory is that though that is the slice of humanity that runs the world. So we can't, no matter how much we rail against it, that's the way it is, unless we get into that stratosphere.
Well,
And I'm not
there's-
able to do that.
there's
So,
another
yeah.
way
There's
to-
a thing, you can either decide to rule the world and make it better, or rule the world and I don't care what the rest of the world. I don't care about anybody else. And
Well,
that's
yeah,
the
I
type
understand
of
what you're
person
saying,
I'm
but at the same
frustrated
time, you have
with.
to. I understand that. I understand that.
think of it from another point of view. And this is the way I used to view the English upper classes. But in our country, we had a family